Hello everybody, and welcome to the channel. I will be reviewing patch 7.35, and not just for myself. Even though I see myself as somewhere in the serious midcore category, I will do my best to imagine how I might feel as a casual or hardcore player in this patch as well. To that end, I need to first explain my personal view on what I see as casual, midcore, or hardcore. I will be doing this for all future major patches as well, so feel free to skip ahead, especially if you already know what I categorize as casual, midcore, or hardcore from other vids that I've posted. From my perspective, a casual player is someone who will at most only clear extremes sporadically on release, and if they do clear other extremes, it might be at the end of an expansion when you have the highest eye level of that expansion. My opinion of a midcore player is one who pretty much clears almost all extremes on patch, possibly farming some of them. The more serious midcore players will do Savage, but only clear it at the earliest in maybe week 4 and perhaps even as late as 3 months later. Now I know this is a huge range, but it's pointless to create too many categories for players. And as for hardcore, I see hardcore players as anything ranging from world first down to clearing a Savage tier in the time range of week 1 to week 3. Hardcore players also include solo deep dungeon players. Obviously, I am but one lawprit, so I can only do my best to try hear the other voices within the community when making my assessment. With this patch, an evaluation of the new mode, Quantum, must also be done. That will be at the end of the video because I do not want to drag you all into discussing the mechanics and what I believe to be necessary modifications for this mode in the future. So let's start with rating this patch. For casual play mode, I give this patch 9 stars out of 10. Midcore, I give this patch 7 stars out of 10. Hardcore, I also give this patch 7 stars out of 10. From this point on, what I say may be content spoilers. If you trust my opinion, maybe you have already seen some of my other potential future patch rating vids, you might want to go through the content yourself before listening to my explanation of my ratings. Okay, so now let me explain my ratings. In this patch, Pilgrim's Traverse, Arkveld Extreme, and Quantum were released. For this patch, much of the same is applicable to both casual and midcore ratings, so I will explore the content's weight on these two groups simultaneously. CBE3 added many different entry points as well as a queue system for the new deep dungeon, Pilgrim's Traverse. That, in itself, made the content much more accessible. No longer does a player need to put aside 4 to 6 hours just to partake in the deep dungeon climb or descent. It can now be done in segments. Not only that, but having cleared Pilgrim's Traverse completely through the new matchmaking queue system, it is also evident to me that the difficulty of the mobs within have been lowered. Mobs die much faster, sometimes before they can even cast their own unique ability. This is in contrast to Eureka Authors, where some mobs take ages to kill, which made that experience feel like a tedious trudge. Also, a vastly higher number of mobs can be stunned or put to sleep in the higher floors of Pilgrim's Traverse, meaning players can significantly lower the difficulty if they utilize stun and sleep often. This means that a player can potentially clear Pilgrim's Traverse without even knowing the attack patterns of many of the mobs. And CBE3 removes some of the super frustrating mechanics such as blind and pacification flaws, debuffs that I believe are particularly frustrating and unfun in the old deep dungeons. So overall, the result is that this deep dungeon is significantly more approachable for both casual and midcore players. There is still some stress. Things can still go wrong if players move or pull recklessly, or step on the traps, or fail to spot patrols. But generally speaking, though you might still fail sometimes, it is possible to clear the whole deep dungeon through the match party queue. Even if you wipe, you no longer have to start from a low floor. The most important thing is that casual players can step in, perhaps feel a bit of stress, but sense that they can overcome this challenge. Midcore players should be right at home in this new deep dungeon design. Now onto Arkveld Extreme from the Monster Hunter collaboration. I believe this fight is also friendly to casual players. It has easy to understand, visually obvious mechanics. In contrast, the last Extreme, Zalania, had the witch hunt mechanic that many players ultimately more or less decided to cheese with huge scholar stacking shields. Now this, however, makes Arkveld Extreme feel a bit too simplistic for midcore players. Now granted, the Extreme is still a lot of fun to farm, but it is for this reason that I have to knock a star off the Midcore rating. When it comes to the rewards for both completing floor 1 to 100 Deep Dungeon and Narkfeld Extreme, it is plentiful, and I think at an elevated amount compared to old Deep Dungeons and Extremes, so it's definitely an improvement here. Now on to Quantum. Unfortunately here I would have to say that CBU3 failed the execution of Quantum for both casual and midcore players. Why? I know some of you might think that I'm an idiot for expecting casual players to participate in Quantum, but first give me a chance to explain my thoughts. Quantum was sold as a scaling content, so in my mind I expected Quantum 1 to be a teeny tiny bit harder than a normal trial. This would have allowed casual players to maybe jump in, try out the mechanics, and slowly improve. Then, as they climb, upon reaching Quantum 15, which I believe should have had comparable mechanical stress to an extreme trial, these casual players would get rewarded with a bronze coffer upon overcoming the challenge. In case you did not know, Quantum 15 is the minimum level at which you can get a bronze coffer. And then you climb, maybe at Quantum 25 it would be at the level of a turn 2 savage. That to me is what a scaling piece of content should be, so that players can gradually raise their competency and knowledge. Unfortunately that was not the case. I've gone into Quantum 15 myself, and I will tell you its mechanical demand, its mechanical stress on an individual is comparable to a third or fourth turn of a savage. Now I know that some of you might say that it's a 4-man, so the demands of the mechanics must be higher to simulate an extreme or savage in 4-man. I completely disagree with that statement in this situation, because I believe that, especially for casual players, it's more about whether mechanics feel overwhelming. It doesn't matter if it's a 4-man or 8-man. If the mechanics feel overwhelming on the individual, casuals will just not do the content. Quantum 15 is the lowest level to get rewarded with a bronze coffer, since its mechanics in terms of mechanical stress on the individual is comparable to a third or maybe even fourth savage, especially in the case of tech and healers. Due to these reasons, I believe that Quantum is dead on arrival for casuals. Frankly, it's also dead on arrival for midcore as well, because of the failed scaling. For this reason, I had to knock off a star for casuals, which is how I ended up with 9 over 10. I have to knock off 2 stars for midcore. Now, why am I knocking off more stars for midcore? In my opinion, Quantum could have been the most amazing content for midcore. The reason for this is, imagine if, in terms of mechanical stress on a player, imagine if Quantum 15 was more similar to an extreme. Quantum 25 was more like a second turn of a savage rate tier, Quantum 30 was more like a third turn, and Quantum 35 was more like a fourth turn, and obviously Quantum 40 is more like savage plus ultimate. Midcore players, under this situation, would truly be able to climb while gradually increasing the capacity to deal with mechanical stress. There will be loads of parties in PF for lower and mid quantum levels. Unfortunately, the failed scaling meant that only Quantum 40 really exists. I mean, think about it. If Quantum 15, in terms of mechanical stress, is already close to a turn 4 savage, then you might as well just do Quantum 40, right? Why bother with all the levels below Quantum 40? Additionally, I have to say that there's another huge problem with Quantum, that being the lack of exclusive rewards. The focus is exclusive. In my opinion, if we added something exclusive to Quantum 15 while ensuring that Quantum 15 feels more like an extreme trial, then many midcore players would happily farm it like an extreme trial, which is, I think, what CBU3 should aim for. Instead, the mechanical stress is more like a third or fourth turn savage. And the rewards are just first light relics, which can be obtained from the sacks that are rewarded from weekly challenge log, completing 4 sets of Pilgrim's Traverse. And as a result, Quantum will have little draw, will ignite little desire in the players. Now at this point, I have to take a step back. Quantum is a new piece of content, so to be fair to CBU3, in the past, they've never created a 4-man extreme accessible for casuals or the lower end of midcore ever. They've never created scaling content, so I think it's important to give feedback, but new content always needs time to fully develop. Scaling content is definitely something that FF14 will benefit from in the future. It's just that the scaling needs to be done right, such that casual player who wants to give it a shot won't be immediately overwhelmed by the lowest level that rewards the minimum reward, in this case, Quantum 15. So for these reasons, I gave casuals 9 stars out of 10 while giving midcore 7 stars out of 10, because of the lost opportunity that a well-scaled quantum could have benefited midcore players. But in the end, let's focus on the positives. The changes to the deep dungeon this patch heavily benefited casuals and midcore, and the new extreme is approachable to casuals while fun for midcore, even if slightly easy. The main problem with the new content this patch is that quantum scaling was a failure, that combined with a lack of exclusive rewards in quantum. I will go into more details at the end for quantum if you're curious why I think the current exact mechanics of quantum are a failed execution of scaling. Once again, I don't want to be too harsh with quantum because it is a new piece of content that CBU3 is trying to bring into the game. And better execution in the future will definitely give quantum a very entrenched place in gameplay. So, on to hardcore rating, which, as a reminder, I gave hardcore rating 7 stars out of 10. Why? Why did I give it 7 stars? As I've mentioned before, the mobs in Pilgrim's Traverse die faster and are thus less of a threat compared to mobs in older deep dungeons. Now this increased ease of play for casuals and midcore, and yes, obviously while solo, you still need to do everything properly, and the deep dungeon definitely still presents a challenge. Still, we have to acknowledge that it does have an increased ease of play, and unfortunately, this increased ease of play does mean that hardcore deep dungeon players will find it less challenging than previous deep dungeons. Once again, I'm certain that soloing Pilgrim's Traverse is still challenging, and it's likely that the changes will draw more players to attempt a solo run, which I think is great for the deep dungeon community. But I have to acknowledge that some hardcore deep dungeon players might feel that Pilgrim's Traverse is lesser. And some hardcore solo players, I'm certain, are disappointed that it's not quite as punishing or exclusive, and I think that's completely fair. I mean, obviously though, there is another view, which is there are some players who think that super high health of mobs in Eureka Orthos and other punishing features are just unnecessary annoyances rather than actual challenge. And in the end, solo players still need to climb from a lower floor, and that trudge is a challenge itself. So, my own assessment is that for solo hardcore players, Pilgrim's Traverse should still be comparable fun to the other deep dungeons. Less exclusive perhaps, but definitely benefiting by higher participation from the community as a whole. Now onto Quantum for the hardcore raiders. I will first have to acknowledge that having to trudge through deep dungeon or the floors to unlock Quantum 40 must be annoying for some hardcore raiders. If I myself purely wanted to take on the challenge of Quantum 40, it would suck if I have to force myself through Pilgrim's Traverse. Now, to be fair, many other MMOs require the players to grind a lot of random crap to qualify for raids, so compared to that, 1 to 100 deep dungeon is peanuts. But still, we have to recognize that Final Fantasy XIV has never done this sort of thing in the past, so it's absolutely understandable for some hardcore players to be ticked off by this. Now as for Quantum 40 itself, I will base the quality of Quantum 40 on what the hardcore players themselves say. From what World First players say, the mechanics of Q40 are at least Savage Plus, if not Ultimate level. Obviously with 4 man and with the fight only lasting 10 minutes, the fight got cleared faster than an Ultimate, but many raiders do consider it the best 4-man fight ever created in the game. So based on that, Quantum 40 is definitely a success. But now I have to pivot to the problems. First of all, the rewards, and I do not need to be a hardcore raider to recognize problems in the rewards with Quantum 40, or other Quantums, frankly. Clearing Quantum gives sacks of First Light, which can be opened to get First Light relics. And maybe if you're lucky, a mount 1 that is not exclusive might drop from these sacks. However, anyone can get these sacks of First Light from weekly challenge log, so it's understandable that some players who cleared Q40 will find the rewards lacking. I myself haven't done Q40, but even I can tell that the rewards are lacking. The main issue is that there's nothing exclusive, so there's little reason for players who might have cleared Q40 to return for reclears as well. Without exclusive items, there just isn't a big enough motivating factor to go in to clear Quantum. Not to mention, I doubt that many hardcore raiders are even crazy mount collectors, so even the drops from the sacks of First Light don't really matter in most cases. If you recall, Alo Criterion Savage rewarded players with glowing weapons, as do Ultimates, and I believe a game mode, at this level of difficulty needs to at least provide something unique that can be visually displayed on a character. And I don't mean anything by this, but I think hardcore players love to have a visual flex. Many players have already expressed that CBU3 could have added a glow to the Deep Dungeon Aether Pool weapons for players who have cleared Quantum 40. Now I also need to bring up that hardcore players expected an ultimate in 7.3. Does Quantum 40 compensate for that? I think yes, because it is apparently one of the best 4-man challenge design in the game's history. But, as mentioned, the rewards are disappointing. Now, I would go as far as to argue that the rewards are actually worse, yes worse, than the rewards from the first and second criterion. These two criterions actually gave an exclusive mount alongside currency unique to the content, whereas Quantum provides no exclusive item and only a currency. Now, as I mentioned during my discussion of the content for casual and midcore players, Quantum scaling is a failure. This failure also affects hardcore players. Why? I think many hardcore players who have cleared Q40 would still have quite a bit of fun joining Q15, Q25, and Q30 parties that could have been listed from casual and midcore players. Now that's only possible if the scaling and rewards was actually done well, such that casual and midcore players feel like they have the ability to climb, and once they do climb, be rewarded fairly for their effort. Once again, the mechanics of Quantum 15, the minimum level for a bronze coffer, are unfortunately of the mechanical stress comparable to a third or even fourth turn of a savage raid. So overall, a few issues in the hardcore scene, but I believe deserving of 7 stars out of 10, because in the end, it is one of the best 4-man challenges in the game. So what do you all think? How would you rate 7.35 for these 3 types of players? Comment below. Okay, now on to my last segment, and this segment is for those who are curious about Q15 mechanics. And forgive me, in this segment I will descend into a bit of a rant. So let's go over the mechanics of a phase in Q15, and you tell me if you think any casual or even most midcore players will want to deal with this, yeah? You tell me. I made my judgment, and you can make your own judgment on Q15. Remember, there's no exclusive rewards from this content. Okay, so how does the first major mechanic work? Basically, as a healer, whenever I heal, a humongous proximity AoE will explode around me. If any of the other 3 players get hit by this AoE, it will suffer debuffs, get damaged, and get knocked. So, essentially as a healer, I'm too far to do any AoE heals on my party members, and I have to stand at the back edge of the arena, shift left and right to heal the DPS on the northwest and northeast far corners. I also have to be careful while moving between these 2 positions, because if I heal while in the very middle of the backline, I will hit the tank that's directly north with my proximity AoE. All this happens while a lot of damage is outgoing during this phase, with the tank being hit by extremely hard hitting tank busters. And also, you can see that as a healer, I'm constantly healing throughout the phase prior toward this humongous AoE thing on me. And the tank is getting pretty heavily chunked. Essentially, what this means is tanks need to be very careful in using the mitigation cooldowns. Once again, let me remind you, this is just Q15, the lowest level of Quantum required to be rewarded with a bronze coffer. So after seeing this, you tell me, do you think casual players or any lower end of midcore healers and tanks will enjoy dealing with this level of stress for no exclusive reward? My answer is hell no. You tell me yours. Okay, let's look at the other major mechanic present in Quantum 15, crime and punishment. Now, I jumped in to check out Q15 and my party never progged past this. So let's look at a guide for Q40 crime and punishment. Obviously Q40 does have, a few extra flares added on, but essentially the primary mechanic of crime and punishment works exactly the same. So how does this mechanic work? Basically, you get a debuff. And this debuff is like a virus that you have to pass between your party members. So this virus will at some point explode upon reaching a 16th charge. And you need to pass this debuff around the 4 party members. Here's the thing, yeah? This virus charges faster if you have the light buff, and it charges slower if you have the dark buff. And these dark and light buffs are from the puddles on the ground. And you need to do this passing of the virus in between other mechanics that will happen. So essentially, you need to switch your own buff from dark to light at specific moments so that you can charge the virus and eventually that virus will explode and you share that stack with another player to pass the virus on. And you have to be very careful to control the stacks of this virus so that it explodes and passes in between mechanics coming out from the boss. And if you don't time it right, you'll get 2 quick instances of damage that could wipe the party. Now also remember, if you as the player have the light buff, you only deal damage to Eminent Grief, while when you have the dark buff, you only deal damage to Devoured Eater. So you also need to make sure you have the right target while swapping the dark and light buffs to manage the virus tick and timing that virus tick to pass on in between mechanics that the boss does. Yes, you have to do all of this in Quantum 15, the lowest level where you can get the Bronze Coffer, which doesn't even have any exclusive rewards. So once again, you tell me, if a casual or lower end of a midcore player, after finishing floor 99 and floor 100 of Pilgrim's Traverse, step foot into Quantum, you tell me, is it reasonable to expect them to be able to deal with these sorts of mechanics by Quantum 15? Especially when it comes to the stress on tanks and healers that have to handle most of the mids and healing of damage output from the boss, and in the healer case, single target? I don't think this is a reasonable expectation, or a reasonable scaling. Remember, the point of scaling content is to allow players to gradually learn and improve the gameplay from casual up to Savage Plus. It is climbing a gentle slope of a hill. So I hope you now see why I see quantum scaling to be an absolute failure. Now let me give some feedback on how I think the scaling system can be better implemented. Okay, take the humongous proximity AoE around the healer when the healer heals. This mechanic could be modified so that the size of that exploding proximity AoE is significantly smaller in lower levels of Quantum. Imagine if in Quantum 5 the AoE is this small. And then, at Quantum 15, the proximity AoE is slightly larger. And then at Quantum 25 it becomes this size. And then at Quantum 30 it becomes the current size that it is. Imagine a casual healer coming into Quantum. At first, that casual healer will feel that's no big deal. It's a tiny AoE around you. Alright, this casual healer will be able to use AoE heals to keep other players up in, for example, Quantum 5. And then, this exploding proximity AoE around the healer gets larger as they climb. So, this casual healer will gradually need to be more precise with positioning to hit all players with an AoE heal without hitting them with that proximity AoE. And then keep climbing, and at Quantum 25, this is just an example, at Quantum 25, this healer will no longer be able to hit all 3 players simultaneously with an AoE heal because the proximity AoE is too big. So now, they have to start adjusting and doing single target heals, maybe using more mitts and other tools to heal players that are too far. And then, at the larger size, maybe around Quantum 30, the healer finally has to shift along the back of the arena and single target heal the party and use many tools that can heal at an extended range. For example, White Mage might use the Lily Bell, shield healers might have to spread the shields early, and in Scholar case, you might need to position your fairy so that it can heal for you from range. And through this method of adjusting the radius the width of that healer proximity AoE, it will first inform a casual player of the mechanic, and as the scaling goes up and that proximity AoE around the healer widens, it gradually puts more pressure on the player to execute more precise movement, positioning, mitts, and use of various different kinds of healing spells. So I hope you can see what I'm going for with this very basic method of adjusting the size of AoEs. Now, this sort of thing can be done with the tank too. The tank in this fight has to dodge line AoEs while inside a tiny isolated arena. Imagine if at lower levels the width of the AoE is narrower, and it gradually widens to the max width at Quantum 30. So only at Quantum 30 will the tank be required to be the most precise with movement and positioning, while at lower levels there's a bit more leeway. So once again, this is creating a gentle slope of increasing stress and demand on the player. This is what I believe should be one of the scaling methods in future scaling content. Obviously, how you design this scaling for mechanics such as passing a virus, that will require a bit more creativity. But I hope that I managed to convey what I believe should be one of many good scaling methods. Okay, so as for rewards, I've discussed that quite a lot already. Once again, I do think some exclusive items are necessary to motivate more players to try the content. I mean, even extreme trials have exclusive items relative to normal trials. So the normal final first boss, that's floor 99 of the deep dungeon, if that's the normal version, then surely Quantum deserves exclusive rewards, right? Okay, so I also want to provide a suggestion, which is gear with extra benefits in deep dungeon related content. For example, imagine maybe the bronze coffer on Q15 drops an earring with haste specific to deep dungeon and Quantum. And then the silver chest drops a neck piece and ring, once again with haste in the content, and gold chest drops a wrist and a second ring. So as players, right, as you climb the scaling Quantum, you actually gradually gain items that help you climb further and higher. And obviously these items also provide additional benefits within the 1 to 100 floors of Pilgrim's Traverse. And this really creates the idea of scaling, of climbing, of getting stronger as you climb Quantum levels. So I think that will also create a good feeling. Anyway, here's where my rant ends, and let's take a step back. Once again, let's have perspective. This is the first attempt at scaling content that CBU3 has done, and I hope that with feedback from the community, CBU3 will have a better idea on how to scale this sort of content in the future. Once again, the focus is casual and mid-core players should not be immediately bashed in the head by overwhelming turn 3 to 4 savage mechanics in a lower level like Quantum 15. Reasonable scaling based on mechanical stress on the individual player combined with exclusive rewards are needed to get players to participate in this content. Thanks for watching the vid. Like, comment and subscribe as that helps a lot with growing the channel. And I hope everyone has fun with the patch.